Hello and welcome to Walkie Talkie number 8. It's still the same evening as the previous two Walkie Talkies. I just want to keep going. I just feel inspired. And it's such a wonderful evening. You can see here the sunlight shining through the trees. I'm approaching the village. So I wanted to continue a little bit on what I touched upon in the previous two Walkie Talkies. And I'll be doing it walking on this beautiful forest road. So, this is also interesting. I just can't stop, sorry. As I approach the village and it's getting dinner time. I'm getting hungry too. But, so I was talking about Alfred North Whitehead, process philosophy, a little bit about subatomic particle physics, and about the way we have diagrams and maps that we always project onto the world. Diagrams and maps that, for one thing, simplify everything to a horrible extent, and for another thing, they ingrain in us the sense that everything is made of separate parts. And I would like to also go back to my experience as a drawing teacher, because I can make an interesting link there as well. So all these maps and diagrams we've been exposed to since childhood have almost without exception made us think that the world is representable through things like that, through maps and diagrams, which is a strange idea to begin with. We believe it, that this is possible, that this is an adequate representation. And so it has really immersed us non-stop in the idea that things are made of separable parts. And as a culture, I think you might say that with the advance of scientific mindset, we have been trying to understand the whole of reality from observing the parts, ever more minute parts. And so we keep cutting things up. We dissect animals, we split cells, we split the atom. We always go to smaller stuff with ever sharper knives. And from that, from what we find there, we hope to understand what the whole is about, which is really a strange idea if you think about it. But this is really what collectively our civilization thinks at this point. You know, it's really funny. You have to make it kind of personal to see how funny it is. You know, if you take, for example, a person you love deeply, a partner or a parent or a child, and then you would sort of begin to investigate their organs, their tissues, their intestines, their cells, their blood group. And then from that information, you would hope to understand what that person is like or what it is to be alive as a human being. It doesn't really make sense at all, but we're so hypnotized into that way of thinking that it's in our blind spot. We don't notice what we're doing with that. So, and one of the ways that we separate out things from each other conceptually and visually is to draw a line around them. That's what happens in the simple diagrams we have, like the diagram of the atom I talked about in the previous walkie-talkie, or the diagrams of the biology subjects that my children were taught in school. They were always these line drawings, you know. And then the line would neatly separate the subject from the background. That's a really interesting concept also, that you have the subject and the background, and it's the subject that matters. That's what we're looking at, and the background is usually like, you know, don't bother. Or the space in between objects is usually sort of neglected also. And this was also very apparent when I was teaching drawing or painting. When people were beginning to draw or paint from observation, invariably they were really focused on the objects. And they disregarded the space between the objects or what was behind the objects. They were really focused on the object, that's the result of a kind of being immersed in a worldview that values the separate objects and not so much the field in which they exist. So people were drawing the objects, and the way that they made the object separate from the background or the space was to draw a line around them. In a drawing class, at first everybody or most persons resort to a simple line to draw the contour of an object, and that way make it stand out from the background. Now in reality there are no lines around things. You know, if you would draw a bottle and the person draws with a line the contour of the bottle, if you would walk up to the bottle and walk around it, at no point would you discover a line around the bottle. At most you can speak of horizons. Like an object may have an horizon where it sort of vanishes from sight because it curves away from our viewpoint. Like the horizon would be drawn as a line, but if you would walk up to the horizon and try to find a line anywhere, you wouldn't find it anywhere. You would never find the line of the horizon. So, and actually trying to represent reality with a simple line really makes it kind of flat and not very interesting. So a lot of my work as a teacher at first always had to do with trying to find ways to people to look at the world less focused on the contour, and then less in trying to find other ways to suggest the edge of one thing without using a line. And that really has people confused at first, because we're so indoctrinated into the line drawing and the diagram, the map. And it usually takes quite some work and guided exercises to make people see that it is possible to suggest the presence of an object within a space without resorting to drawing a simple little line around it, which makes it really diagrammatic and flat and boring. And so when people start to draw like that or paint, where the edges become a little more fuzzy, where you play more with light and dark to suggest where the edge of an object is, then it becomes so much more interesting. And then another step is to make people aware of the space in between objects, like, which is totally disregarded usually at first. Like it's not even there. So if two objects would be separated by a distance, let's say double the diameter of the objects, people often would draw them standing right next to each other because they didn't pay attention to the space in between the objects. And so this is an interesting analogy, because that's something we collectively have to do as well, I think, to learn to pay attention to the space in between objects or the things we perceive as objects. We have to pay more attention to what we think is empty space. Because it's the space that makes everything possible. I listened to a lecture by a quantum physicist last week, and she said that, as I said, the electrons can disappear and appear somewhere else. That's what happens when they move from one orbit to another one. Like there can only be certain states where an electron can be in regards to the nucleus of the atom. And it's not like when they shift energy and they go one level up, it's not like you see them moving from one orbit to the next. They disappear in one place and they reappear in the other place. So they vanish into the empty space for a while. And I think what I want to say with that is we need to pay attention to the spaces between things we are fixed on, because what people do when they're beginning to draw is a reflection of how we look at the world. We focus on objects, but also events very much. We isolate events from the background, or it's being done for us by the media, of course. There is a huge filter in how the media present information to us. Like there's a huge selection which also defines how we perceive the world to a certain extent. And so we pay attention to those certain events, objects, places, and we sort of disregard the spaces in between. And we also pay attention to certain ideas, certain concepts, like certain ideas about how to tackle the climate crisis, for example. They're very much in the news or they're being talked about. But there are other ideas that are not talked about. And then there is also the sort of silence in between the ideas that we sort of neglect. And like people who start to draw need to start paying attention to the space in between and to the so-called background, and not see them as inferior to what we call objects. In the same fashion, I think we need to re-examine the world, paying attention to the empty spaces in between ideas, the places where we are not looking. Behind me you see a huge wine barrel. There used to be an old wine tasting here. This is a wine area, and there used to be a lot of places where people could come and taste wine. So this is really a huge barrel. You could fit 10 people in there, I think. And it's abandoned now. It's one of those empty spaces that are being neglected and not paid attention to. So and so that's also one of the things that I like to do with this whole project, is to try to divert attention away a little bit from what everybody's talking about in regards to ecological crises or systemic crises, and to sort of point the attention towards things that are in the background now, so to speak, that are sort of underexposed in the media or never exposed in the media. Not conspiracies, but processes that are happening under the radar, like processes of coming into being of different ways of being in the world. And there is a lot of that happening, actually. That is what makes me hopeful and positive, actually, about the future. Because there's so much more happening than what we get served in the news every day. And a lot of the things that are happening are really interesting and fascinating and good, and they're happening bottom up, like from below upward. They're coming into being. Unplanned, largely, often still uncoordinated, but that's beginning to change, I think. And so we need to start paying attention to that, just as the people who started to learn how to draw had to start paying attention to the space in between the objects, and not think that the object is what matters and that everything else is sort of to be disregarded, that the space in between the objects is sort of negligible or unimportant. Because as everything is an uninterrupted field, there are no hierarchies in that field. The emptiness is not less important than what we perceive as full. And I think it's in the Tao Te Ching somewhere that Lao Tzu says that, you know, we think the jug is the valuable thing, but it's the emptiness inside the jug that makes it possible for the jug to contain anything. I'm not sure if it was in the Tao. I'll have to look it up. So I'm slowly entering the village from another side. There are a lot of little houses that used to contain the presses where grapes used to be pressed, because this is all wine area. You can see here behind me the vineyards, so it's still very active as a winemaking area. It's pretty good wine, actually. I think I will have some when I get home. And I'm walking into this beautiful sunset. So all of this is really so interesting and it asks for more explanation in a way, and more so much more is to be said about these things, and I will continue. So hopefully you will bear with me, and I hope to see you again in the next Walkie Talkie. If you do like the Walkie Talkies, don't forget to hit the like buttons. I'm being told that that really helps to get more people to see the videos. And please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even if you're already subscribed to the blog of a Biosphere project, it helps the YouTube channel if more people subscribe. Or so people tell me. So I will see you next time. This time I'm really gonna call it quits for today. Next time will be a different country, I think. Thank you, and see you next time. Namaste.